Now I like to cut all my mortises on a mortising machine. Now this industrial model is really no different than the benchtop model. The key to setting up the mortiser is to make sure that the drill bit protrudes from the bottom of the chisel by about 1/16 of an inch. You can then back the fence up to the chisel to ensure that the chisel is parallel to the fence. To cut my mortises, I begin by marking out the depth of the mortise on the end of the leg. Now lower the bit to the line to set up the depth stop. I begin by defining the end of the mortise, making my way down to maximum depth of cut in 3 or 4 separate cuts. Now I can move down the line making full depth cuts. Once I get about 2/3 of the way down, I move over and define the other end of the mortise just like before. This ensures my chisel is supported by the stock on all 4 sides. Now just finish hogging out the rest of the waste. Readjust the depth of cut for the mortise in the wide face of the leg. It's the same process as before. Define the first end of the mortise, hog out about 2/3 of the way down, define the opposite end of the mortise, and finish hogging out the waste. Now the next thing that we need to do is cut some tenons. I mean, there's lots of different ways to do this. You can do them by hand, you can certainly do them on the router, you can do them on the bandsaw, but the way that I prefer to do them is with a dado blade on the table saw. And the first thing that I need to do is to set up the height of the blade. You'll notice that I'm not cutting all the way to my shoulder lines. That's because I like to chisel to my line to make sure the shoulders' lengths are dead on. Okay, it's time to fit tenons. What I generally like to do is to plane the surface of the tenon with a shoulder plane. I take the outside surface of the tenon and place that against the outside surface of the leg so that the outside of the rail is facing to the inside of the bench. And I check the alignment of the shoulder with the outside wall of the mortise. And if those are in perfect alignment, when this piece is turned around and put into place, the alignment on the outside will be perfectly flush with the outside of the leg. I like to use a chisel to mark my joinery with Roman numerals. The next thing that we need to do is to cut a shoulder on the top of these rails. And so I'm going to pick up the width of the mortise with a pencil line and bring it down along here. Grab my rip saw. This is just a dovetail saw. And I'm going to cut down along the line that I just made. Now, if I went too far and damaged that shoulder, I haven't chiseled back the shoulder line, so, you know, I'm pretty safe. So I can cut along that surface pretty well also. Now I'm just going to go ahead and see if that's going to fit into the opening. Looking pretty good. I like to bevel the tops of my tenons to make them go into the mortise. So that's looking pretty good. Now all I have to do is chisel to my shoulder line. All right, now what I'll do is I'll just register the edge of the chisel in the scribe line that I made, and then just go ahead and pare this across the shoulder. And to make it easier on yourself, what you should really do is only take approximately 1/16 of an inch as you work your way across. And you see these little feathers, and each cut that I make here, I'm making sure that it registers in the scribe line. You know what that is? Industrial art. Then we'll come back from the other side. Now what I'm looking for here is to make sure that I have a good square shoulder. And we should be able to see our progress right here, cutting pretty close to the line, so I was cutting pretty square. And I want to make sure that I clean out this corner well. Now I'm going to turn this 90 degrees and come in from the end here. All right, we'll make it fit into the mortise. It seats nicely, just like it was made for it. All right, I need to cut these rabbets into these side rails and also into the legs, or stop rabbets into the legs. I've set up my marking gauge to the thickness of the plywood, and I'm going to lay that out on one of my rails. Now for the rest of these, what I'll do is just put pencil lines on here so I know which edge that I need to cut them on. You don't want to be cutting rabbets on the wrong edge of the part. When cutting multiple pieces like this, it's a good idea to line up all the parts in a direction in order they need to be cut. Now I raise the blade to my scribe line and set the rip fence to the width of the rabbet. Now it's a good idea to assemble one of these so that we can find the location of the stop rabbets on the legs. So we'll go ahead and mark these right here. I use a square to carry over the marks I made on the assembled end. They need to be visible on the top surface where it meets the rip fence. Once again, it's a good idea to clearly mark the corners you'll be rabbeting. Now mark onto the rip fence the point where the saw blade protrudes and descends through the throat plate. These marks represent the start and stop points of your cut. Begin with the back of the leg against the stop. Swing the leg in above the blade. Ease the leg forward until the mark on your rip fence lines up with the end of cut mark on the leg. After I cut the stop rabbets for the legs on one end of my bench, I reset the stop to cut the rabbets on the opposite end. On each end assembly there is a right and left leg, and the cuts need to be mirrored. This means that you'll need to reset the stop block for each pair of legs. All right, now I need to go ahead and square up these ends. I'll assemble a rail and mark it with my knife. Now I'll need to pick up the depth of the cut with my square and transfer a line off the end of my square. Now we'll go over to the end of the bench, clamp it in place, and chop it square. Now when I start to chop, I always chop across the grain to begin with, about a 1/16 of an inch away from the line, and then line up my chisel with the inside of the rabbet. I don't want to have to deal with any grain direction, and cutting across sort of eliminates the grain, whether it angles in one direction or the other. Well, I've got one end of the leg chopped square. I got 7 more to do, so what I think I'll do is just pass it off to my assistant, Steve. So we're going to move on to the doors and drawer partitions and dividers that'll have sliding dovetails in them.